On April 10th, 1998, Ted White Jr. was charged with 13 felony criminal counts ranging from rape, child molestation, sodomy, and accused of deviant sexual intercourse with his 12-year-old stepdaughter. In 1999, he was convicted in a Missouri courtroom by a prosecutor who withheld important exculpatory evidence proving his innocence. Ted then spent the next 5 years at the Missouri State Penitentiary, incarcerated at the infamous Walls Prison in Jefferson City, Missouri, which Time magazine called the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Built in 1836, the same year that Andrew Jackson was President of the United States, Davy Crockett died at the Alamo, and Charles Darwin was sailing his HMS Beagle around the world. Because Ted White was absolutely 100% innocent, he was now in the fight of his life to prove that innocence. He'd been set up by his ex-wife Tina and the investigating police detective who became lovers during Ted's trial and later married. The entire molestation allegations had been fabricated. Evidence was destroyed of the alleged child victim's diary she had written at age 12, which mentioned nothing about any abuse, but rather praised her dad, Ted, and derided the ex-wife Tina as an overbearing, insensitive mother who didn't care about it. The former police detective later admitted to receiving $500,000 worth of stock that Ted was forced to forfeit as a convicted felon. Imagine how Ted White endured those 5 long years in prison with some of America's most dangerous criminals while being classified as a rapist and a child sex offender. Imagine his anxiety through 3 criminal trials, not knowing if he would ever get justice. Imagine the horrific fear and pain Ted felt when he was violently attacked in prison, breaking bones in his face that required him to have reconstructive surgery. Imagine his humiliation, his indignity, his seething anger, and the hopelessness in feeling there was no justice. Can you imagine being in his shoes, feeling accused, condemned, and forgotten to the world? Today, the Insider Exclusive is proud to present a story of injustice, the wrongful conviction of Ted White Jr., and the dedicated lawyers who fought incessantly for his release and his acquittal. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from the McAllister Law Firm in Kansas City, Missouri. I want to welcome you to the show, Matt O'Connor and Cindy Short. Good having you here today. We're here talking about the Ted White case, but before we get into the actual criminal case, and there was 3 trials involved, I think our audience would like to know a little bit more about why you guys do what you do, because you've been doing it for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, we have, yeah.
Defending the people that are innocent and against all the odds. You've been doing this, you were with the Public Defender's Office for what, 15 years?
Yes.
And you too, weren't you?
Yeah, I didn't make it, I didn't survive as long as Cindy did, but yeah, it was
when you say you didn't survive, it's pretty tough?
It is, it's a vocation, and you have to be committed to it, you know, mind, body, and soul, it is.
Tell a little bit about your background, Cindy, up until this case.
Well, as you said, I was a public defender for a total of 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
I did, all of my service was in trial offices.
Yes.
And in 1994, I went into the Capital Division of the Public Defender's Office. And from 1994 until today, most of my time is taken up defending people who are charged with capital crimes.
Is there any particular reason why you handle the ultimate in those type of cases? Why you gravitate towards that?
Well, you would not have been able to tell me coming into the law that I would be doing capital work. It was a slow evolution.
Yeah.
I was born and for many years raised in Texas, so it was not a natural place for a Texan to go to be defending.
You watch a lot of people get executed in that state.
Well, and people in Texas have very strong opinions about everything. So it was a long, slow evolution. It was learning a lot about people and poor people and how they're treated in the criminal justice system, and really feeling that ultimately my heart was with indigent defense, and where I was maybe needed the most was in capital work.
I understand you have recently opened up a program with Jerry Spence at the Trial Lawyers College that deals just with that. What is that program?
Well, it's in its 10th year, believe it or not, and we have a death penalty program at Trial Lawyers College in which we invite teams, capital teams from around the country to join us for 8 days of training.
And obviously it's been pretty beneficial to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it must be, you know, when you handle a case like this, like even when we talk about the Ted White case, you can't, when you go home at night, you can't leave you can't leave the job at the office, can you?
No.
I mean, you're constantly thinking about it, aren't you? Now, Matt, you were the first criminal criminal defense lawyer for Ted.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that first trial.
I actually knew Ted before the false allegation ever surfaced, so that's sort of how I became involved.
You know him personally?
Yeah, personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was. We lived in the same subdivision, moved within the same social circles, so I was familiar with both himself and his family, and was more than willing to assist him initially. But because, you know, as an attorney, you need to be careful when your personal relationship is such that it could even subconsciously taint your objective evaluation of a case. I thought it would be best to bring in someone else to be the lead attorney. So I was, initially I was very in the background in the case, but then as the matter proceeded towards trial and the lead attorney needed assistance taking depositions, I sort of stepped in and became more proactive in that aspect.
What was your initial reaction when you first heard these allegations?
You know, these type of allegations are so damning, just making the allegation, whereas the theory is that the system was required to prove someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Instinctually, as human beings, when you have someone saying that a child has been harmed, you have to overcome that. And really, I think you have to prove you're innocent beyond a reasonable doubt. Whether or not that's the legal standard, that's what jurors want to hear, so that they're confident in their decision.
We're going to get to the second and the third trial later, but tell us what some of the breakdown happened in the system here with this particular case, this trial.
Well, in this trial, I think it's a good metaphor for any case where a miscarriage of justice occurs. It's a combination of factors. It is either sloppy or untrained police investigation, or in this case, unethical. Perhaps prosecutors who are not as savvy at recognizing that, and then a judiciary that turns a blind eye to it. For justice to occur in any case, you have to have solid police work, a prosecutor who upholds the law and enforces it ethically, defense attorneys who are zealous and advocate for their client, and a judge who follows the law and then also works towards the ultimate end.
Yeah, these are kind of broad terms that you're bringing about. Let's be specific here.
Absolutely.
Okay, you're talking about unethical prosecutors. What do you mean exactly? What happened?
Well, I think sometimes, and this is true on both sides of the fence, the case stops becoming about justice and it's viewed as a competition. And I'm sure that at some level, especially younger prosecutors, and in this case the prosecutor was not extremely experienced.
Yeah.
And so there is that overzealousness that usually comes with a lack of depth professionally. And in this case in particular, you had a detective who intentionally withheld critical components of the evidence.
And this detective was the detective that was investigating the allegations
against Ted.
Against Ted.
Right. Yeah.
So the evidence that he withheld was what?
Some of the critical aspects of obviously lying to me under oath at a deposition that he didn't have any personal interest.
And what was that personal interest?
He was in a relationship with the false accuser's mother.
I understand.
Sexual relationship.
Yeah, I understand, to be blunt about it. He had lied to his supervisors his chief of police had told him not to have this relationship.
Right.
And he was meeting with Ted's soon-to-be ex-wife around town, having sex in motels and police cars and various other things, correct?
Correct.
And the prosecutor was aware of this, right?
Correct.
Now, why wouldn't a prosecutor be alarmed if every lawyer is trained to uphold justice and say, wait a minute, I can't go forward with this?
It's mind-boggling. I can't understand that. And maybe that's why I haven't been cut out particularly to do prosecution, because I think both Cindy and myself, we were all faced with every day in the law with ethical and moral decisions, and that's an easy one.
What happened to this prosecutor, by the way? Nothing?
Not that I'm aware of.
So that's a failure of the system too, isn't it?
It is.
A bar complaint was filed against her by Ted's father.
And who is this prosecutor? What is her name?
Jennifer Metler was her name, and she testified in all of the trials, in the public trials. She was as Matt said, she was a young prosecutor. She had dreamed of being in the sexual abuse unit. She wanted to protect children, and Matt's case, Ted's case, was actually the first case that she was assigned to protect a child. And so I think a lot of her decisions were driven by the white hat that she believed that she was wearing. And that's dangerous. That's very dangerous.
Now, you also talked about when the judge doesn't follow the law or turns a blind eye. What do you mean by that?
Or is ignorant of it.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, what I mean by
what
that...
What happened here?
Well, in this case, the rulings were all over the road. Really, there were things that we should have been overruled on that we were successful on, and then there were issues where the prosecutor was able to get away with misconduct. Really, this whole case could have been, the injustice could have been remedied at some degree much earlier in the process. Had it's sort of a conspiracy, if you will, to cover up the wrongdoing.
Now, you mentioned the inexperience of the prosecutor. The judge has been sitting on the bench for a while, hasn't he?
Sure.
So why is he biased? Why does he have a closed viewpoint of what's happening when you say it could have been remedied?
Oh, sure.
Why did he have this bias?
I don't know why he did. I can't answer that question for him. Obviously, I have a lot of personal opinions, some of which I'm ethically prohibited from expressing. However, I think sometimes people have a hard time grasping that this happens. It's uncomfortable to think that the system could be perverted to such an egregious degree.
Well, don't you also think, Matt, that sitting, whether you're a police officer or a judge or a prosecutor, and you sit in a courtroom and you're hearing every day about crisis in people's lives and about crimes that are committed, and probably fairly, 90% of those cases that are coming before him, the persons have committed some wrong. And so I think, when the judges have sat on the bench for a long time, they begin to view the people in the courtroom in a different way. And they come in with the bias, which is, you're guilty.
Yeah. Sure. I understand a citizen came forward, notified the prosecutor and the judge that the detective, the investigating detective, and Ted's ex-wife were having this affair, and they just ignored this information.
Well, actually what happened, it was interesting. I had a tradition of going to lunch with opposing counsel after trial, because you can imagine sometimes when you're defending your respective party, things can get a little heated, and I had that actually scheduled with Jennifer Metler, and a call was made by an individual who worked with Ted's ex-wife and to an investigator who'd been on the case, and then notified me really moments before I was getting ready to go to this lunch. And because I wasn't able to within 20 minutes to verify all that information, I didn't want to bring it up at the lunch, but she could tell something was bothersome. So I said to her, because unlike people on that case and the detective in particular, I'm not very good at hiding things, especially when it's not really within the courtroom. I said, we found out information that, if true, would be extremely disappointing, to say the least, and left it at that. And within 15, 20 minutes that same day, she called me at my office and said, I know what it is. It's that McKinley and Tina were having an affair. We knew about it. We decided not to disclose it. We didn't think it was relevant. And at that point, I'd been an attorney 4.5 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Still had a little bit of the rose-colored glasses intact, and it was like being kicked in the stomach, because you realize that there has been this agreement to thwart justice.
Right. So you appealed this decision, this verdict, and the Missouri Court of Appeals overturned his conviction, correct?
Well, my role at that point was to assist in preparing the motion for a new trial.
Yeah, based on these violations, Brady violations, correct? Is that what you call them?
And at this point, I become a witness.
Yeah.
Because she's made an admission to me that becomes part of how you undo this injustice.
We're going to have Ted on in a little bit here, but we're also we want to know your feelings, and you must have had communication with Ted about what was going on.
Oh yeah.
And you could see, I mean, here you are, and you see all these lawyers are sworn to uphold the law, and you see a man rotting in prison,
right,
being beat up, assaulted, because he's been mislabeled, because he's been wrongly convicted. The verdict was overturned. Now you're into the second trial. This is where you come into the picture, right?
Right, that's right.
So how was the second trial different from the first?
In every way.
Okay.
Because the little piece of information that the anonymous caller revealed and that Matt was able to then present to the judge opened really a Pandora's box of investigation. And truthfully, in the first trial, there was a lot of discovery conducted that was very helpful to what we would be doing. But since this piece of information was missing, it was hard to understand the information they were collecting in its context. You know, the feeling that something's not right here, something's wrong, but we can't find it. And so now the investigation really started anew. And we were, my theory is in my work is the same, I'm sure, as Matt's. If you turn over every single stone you can find, and then you go find more stones, and you turn those over. And that's the way this was. It was a very, because when you're uncovering a conspiracy, it's very difficult.
And that's what it is, a conspiracy.
Right.
You found evidence that the alleged victim, his stepdaughter, Ted's stepdaughter, had kept a diary.
Right.
The diary had been destroyed. Destroyed by whom? The ex-wife and the detective?
Right.
Because in that diary it said that she praised her father, didn't she?
And there was no mention of any kind of wrongdoing by the father. In fact, the only critical items in the diary were against the mother.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the issues, like when she was talking about how the pieces fit together. That seemed very odd.
Yeah.
Because his answer, I think I remember it specifically, was, well, I didn't think it was of evidentiary value.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you get to decide what's of evidence. No, it doesn't work that way.
And anybody that's doing that kind of investigation for 3 days would know that was to be collected.
Both of you sound so calm when you're discussing this, because it's been a while, right? But I mean, at the time that it was happening, you must have been furious.
I got physically sick after the verdict. You know, when she's talking about, something's wrong. And it wasn't my first rodeo, and you do have to have a level of, just for your own well-being, personal indifference. That sounds probably a little more jaded than it's intended, but I got physically sick and vomited when I got home after this first verdict, because there was just something that was just eating at me physically and mentally about this case that I didn't know at that point.
Yeah.
And even to this day, if I think about it too much, it's very unsettling, because how can you have faith as an officer of the court?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that, officers of the court.
Yeah.
On both sides, right?
Yeah. If you
So
know.
we get into the second trial. All this evidence is coming out, correct?
That's right.
And it goes to jury. Right? Ted's feeling pretty confident. You're feeling pretty confident?
Yeah.
Give us the results.
Well, we had a very long jury deliberation, which surprised us. It actually lasted 3 days. We found out later from 11 jurors who had voted to acquit him within an hour that they had literally worked on this one guy to change his mind.
Yeah, why didn't he want to change his mind?
Well, we could have all sorts of theories
you
about
think?
that. Well, I think that he was honestly had a personal agenda
Yeah.
that he hid during the jury selection.
Yeah.
I think he quite enjoyed being the center of attention, which is probably not something he enjoyed in his own life.
A truly sick juror.
Well, a juror that really thwarted justice again. And to the credit of these 11 other jurors, to spend the time, I'd never seen anything like this. Usually if you have a hung jury, the jurors aren't going to spend a lot of time working, but to try to reason with him, to show him the evidence. And they told us, to a certain extent he was enjoying this, but he was not going to change his mind. And I think that regardless of what he would have seen in the courtroom, he was going to rule in the prosecution's favor.
A couple of those jurors, I believe, went out and had town hall meetings. Did they not?
Yeah.
They were raising money for legal defense. They were just telling everybody everywhere that Ted White was innocent,
Right.
correct?
And they became, on their own, instant advocates. They felt that what they had experienced was so egregious and so horrible that they couldn't stay silent. Nobody asked them to do that. They chose to do it on their own.
Let's go back to Ted's mind. 11-1, mistrial is declared. Ted has to go back to Missouri State Penitentiary, the walls.
Well, he has to actually go back to jail. But going back to custody under those circumstances was horrific for everybody. It really was.
Because he's innocent.
Right.
He should be leaving that day.
Right.
Absolutely.
So we get into the third trial. Tell us the difference in the third trial.
Well, the third trial had a lot of bumps as well. We had...
And before you tell us about that, usually, like, you have an 11-1 vote for acquittal. Why is the prosecution trying him again?
That's a really good question. Well, the lead prosecutor left the office, and it was then passed to the second chair. I will say that at that time, under Mr. Nixon, that the Attorney General's office had a very aggressive posture in terms of retrying cases or taking cases where convictions had been secured and fighting tooth and nail to make them get convicted
Just
again.
because they want to win.
Yeah,
they want to have a notch on a gun.
Yeah, I can't, frankly, I don't understand it. We've seen that particular office over 12 years do it again and again and again. So the gal that comes into the courtroom really has no independent discretion. She's been told that she's going to try it.
Doesn't that drive you crazy, though?
Yeah.
People aren't allowed to think anymore.
Yeah.
They're either not allowed to think or choose not to
Well,
think.
they lose their job.
Well, you know what? Then lose your job.
Yeah.
Have some ethics. It wasn't Jay Nixon's license that was in that courtroom. It was hers.
Right.
Yeah.
And, she would not, maybe this is to her credit, but she wouldn't call certain witnesses. She wouldn't call Tina McKinley because she didn't believe her.
Right.
And so I had to call Tina McKinley. And
this is the ex-wife.
The ex-wife. And I treated her as a hostile witness. And Ted will tell you that the cross-examinations of his wife in the second and third trial were some of the happiest moments of his life.
Because it finally got,
Catharsis happened.
Good. Now, how long did the trial last?
Both trials lasted about 3 weeks.
And then the jury went out?
Yes.
And they were back?
Quick.
Right after lunch?
This was the first time I had ever had, we actually had a note to the bailiff where the foreman told the bailiff that he'd like them to pass the message to the judge that they had seen enough.
Yeah.
They were ready to render a verdict, which as a defense lawyer, that was a very scary thing. But what they're really saying is, there's no evidence here.
Yeah.
Tell the defense they don't have to keep putting on evidence. We're ready to go. And we had a quick verdict.
Well, today we have with us Ted White, so let's bring him on now. Ted, I want to welcome you to the show. You have been through a horrendous experience that most people can never even imagine going through. And I want to take us back to the time when you were first accused of sexually molesting your stepdaughter. What were your thoughts in your mind?
Well, I'd just gotten back from a Boy Scout event with my son, and I pull up in the driveway and see my parents' car in the driveway, and they lived about 3.5 hours south of my home in Lee Summit. And I thought that was strange because it was a Saturday. And then I get out of the car, and my then wife Tina starts coming out of the house screaming and yelling at me, and my parents are kind of following her out of the house, and she starts accusing me of this, and it was so ridiculous. I turned around to my son and his friend and said, "Stay in the car." Mm-hmm. And then I went inside, and I said, I think I was so mad. The only thing I could think of is you finally figured out a way to get the house, because we had been having some marital problems before, and
you were separated for a while.
Yeah, I left her because of money that she took when we refinanced our house for bills.
Yeah.
And she took it and hid it somewhere, and so, but I went back to her for the kids, because she basically begged me to come back for their sake. And so we had some problems over that 6 months, and then she was the nicest person you ever saw when I came back. And then all of a sudden this one day I come home and here my parents are, and here she is. So it was total shock to me, but the first thing I did was deny it.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I did was said, well, you know this isn't true, but you finally figured out a way to get the house. And I said, this is a bunch of bullshit, is what I said.
And what did your parents think right then and there?
Well, my dad was worried because he had taken I had some rifles and some guns that I hunted with, and that was taken evidently out of the house and into the trunk. And he took me back into the bedroom. And I said, Dad, you know this is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
And he said to me, you just need to go right now. You just need to get your things and go. And there were 7 trash bags that were already bundled up with my clothes, and that's all I walked out of the house at that day. March 21st, 1998 was the last time I saw my kids, and walked out with 7 trash bags.
And where did you go?
I went over to an apartment where my brother stayed, and feeling numb, trying to figure out, what the angle was or why these allegations were coming out.
Were you close to your stepdaughter?
I was real close with my stepdaughter.
So after you have left here, did you talk with her again?
No, my mom went back over there, and Jamie was there and said, well, I didn't know it was going to be this bad. I want to see my dad.
Yeah.
And she said, Jamie, you can't see your dad because you've made these allegations against him. And again, that's when she said, I didn't know it was going to be this bad.
When did it become a police matter?
It already was, wasn't it?
Well, I went to work, and Matt O'Connor was representing me on some corporate stuff, and Matt had to come in and tell the office what was going on. I asked him to come in and explain that these allegations had been made, and we're going to do everything we can to defend them.
This was your company.
My company.
So you were having your lawyer tell your employees, basically, to make them feel okay.
Well, yeah, because they were horrible allegations by nature, and it's an indefensible allegation when it comes out of a 12-year-old's mouth.
Yeah.
You are guilty from the time, and she wasn't there. I couldn't confront her when she was there. All I said was I wanted her tested immediately, because I knew the things that I was being accused of didn't happen, so go test her.
In other words, test whether she had had any sexual relations with anybody.
That's right. Go now and
test
her.
And by the way, Cindy, was that ever done?
Well, in fact, yes. Well, she
during the first trial?
Yeah, all children who make these allegations end up going to the hospital and
the
having
results?
an exam. The exams were
inconclusive.
Well, they were not inconclusive. They were actually inconsistent with sexual abuse, in that there were allegations of rape and sodomy, and Jamie she had an intact hymen.
Yeah.
It was less than the tip of a pencil, less than 5 millimeters.
So, what the sexual abuse prosecutors will say to you is that a negative test, which is what that was, is now meaningless. Now, if it had helped them, it was meaningful, but it was now meaningless.
Yeah.
That the lack of evidence didn't mean it didn't happen.
Sounds like a real ethical criteria, right?
Well, it's a problem, but that shows you how committed they are.
Now, the police are investigating this. Is it in the newspapers?
Not yet. What happens is I get a call from Detective McKinley, and then
Richard McKinley.
Richard McKinley called me at my work and left a message. He wanted me to give him a call, and I called him back, and that's when I said that I want to come in and make a statement. Here's my attorney's information, and I gave him Matt O'Connor's information, and The only thing that I was told was he didn't need me to give any statement.
Yeah. Now, Cindy, is that a smart thing to do when the police call you and you say, I want to come in and make a statement?
Well, I think what it is, it's a sign of innocence, frankly.
Yeah.
People who are responsible are generally not going to say, let me come in and talk to you. And so,
But I've often heard that it's best not to talk to the
Yes.
police,
Well, that
regardless of whether you're innocent or not.
But that's right. That is right. And but most people feel like the right thing to do is to go in, and if we can just talk about it, we can resolve this.
He didn't want to hear from you.
Yeah. Now that's the part that's unusual.
Yeah,
that was a really worrying sign.
He did not want to hear from you.
No, didn't
Okay.
want my statement.
What happened next?
He said he had everything he needed.
What happened
Well,
next? So why is he calling you?
Well,
Well, you called him.
I called him back. He called me first. I called him back. I think what happened next was that he came to the office right after Easter, and I had been down with my folks, with my brother. We drove up into the office parking lot in Lee Summit. My employees were there, and he pulls up in a car, jumps out, pulls a gun out, and says, "Put your hands behind your head." In front of all my office employees, my brother.
He's by himself.
By himself.
That's kind of unusual, isn't
Well,
it?
here's the two
Cowboy.
things. Yeah, there are two things that are very unusual about this. A detective, any person that is suspected of a crime who says, "I'd like to come talk to you," they would talk to them. There's no way they wouldn't talk to them.
Yeah.
Secondly, this officer knew that Ted had a lawyer. And generally what would happen is the lawyer would be contacted to ask the client to come down to the station and turn themselves in. They would not make a public spectacle of it. And so now we had two clues that there was something unusual about this investigation.
We had actually talked to the prosecution office and said, if there's any way that there's going to be charges on this case, let us present myself. Let me come down and do this. And it was not handled that way.
Which is unusual. These are two things that are very unusual.
So he arrests you that day.
He handcuffed me, put me in the front with my arms behind me, put me in the front seat of the car, and then drove me down to the police station.
And they booked you.
They didn't process me there. They took me into court.
Yeah.
So they kept me there for a little while. Then he put me back in the car, drove me to the Independence Courthouse in Independence, Missouri. Mm-hmm. And on the way there, I asked him one question: "Do you have any wife or kids?" And he looked at me funny, and just didn't answer the question.
Okay.
Well, I didn't know he was doing my wife, taking my kids.
When did that relationship start?
Their relationship?
Yeah.
Well, when we were separated, my wife admitted to me that she went out to a bar in Independence. It was called No Place, and she met this fireman that had a motorcycle and all this that was from Lee Summit.
Yeah.
And then she asked me a question. She said, "Are you having me followed? Did you have me followed?" Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a real funny question because I said, "No, I didn't have you followed." But it turns out that the police officer, the detective in the case, loved motorcycles.
Yeah.
And so evidently they made out in the parking lot, and there were some other things going on. So there was an incident where he came to fix a door. It was identified by our babysitter several months before the allegations came down.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things going on in his life, that he had just dated someone for 5 years, got married, and then all of a sudden there's turmoil, all at the same time that all this is going down.
So finally you get accused of various allegations, right?
I was accused, and it was on the front page of the paper.
And what were they?
12 counts of various child sexual molestation.
What's going through your mind?
That I am absolutely ruined.
Yeah.
My business is ruined.
And
My
was your
family's
business ruined?
in 24 hours.
24 hours. What kind of business did you have?
I had a payroll company that I'd built, the national systems, and we were rolling it out.
And all the customers left immediately?
All the investors, all of the 100 phone calls a day stopped.
And your employees went and got other jobs?
Yeah.
Did any of them stick with you or buy you or
They
as
did.
friends?
They did. Yeah, there were several that did. And
So you were a successful businessman. By these false allegations, you are now totally ruined. Are you in jail?
I am put in jail. No, I was brought before the judge, and she read each one of these horrible allegations. She read out loud while I'm standing in front of her, and he had gone into the Independence Courthouse and told everybody in the courthouse I was a child molester.
Yeah.
So they take me into custody, and I went into Jackson County, and that night I was jumped by, I think 13 inmates while I was in the holding tank. They saw everything on the TV.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
When you say jump, you were beat up. When did they stop beating you up?
when I was laying down in the day room, there was no room because it was overcrowded at the time. And, and that's not a good rap sheet to have.
Yeah,
when
this is the first of many beatings.
That's the first time I'd ever been in jail.
But it's the first of many beatings that you were...
There were several fights and yeah, there were several.
I understand that because some of your beatings required some reconstructive surgery.
Yeah, later on, I was hit with a padlock in my eye socket and had to reconstruct my left eye. My vision is gone on the upper quadrant and the lower quadrants on my left eye. But
so now you go to jail.
Yeah.
You're going through your first trial. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was out for it took a year for us to go. The trial was postponed several times.
Yeah. And you're out on bail.
And I was down living in my hometown. I moved back, and wasn't allowed to see my kids, and went to work to try to help pay the attorney fees. And we get ready to go to trial, and I walk into the Independence Courthouse and think that I'm going to have what I called a Class A defense. I believed in the justice system. Right. I believed that the truth would come out. And there were several things that were red flags that popped up. One, the state didn't call Detective McKinley as their witness. And he's the state's leading witness.
Why wouldn't they do that, Cindy?
Well, because they had a problem with McKinley because he had not collected this exculpatory information.
And they knew it.
And they knew
They
that.
knew it.
And they did not want.
You didn't, I mean, Matt O'Connor was your attorney at the time. He didn't know that at this time.
They knew it at that time. But the
No,
diary,
but Matt didn't know.
Our legal team and I did not know anything
So you got
about
the other
Detective
side.
McKinley.
The other side's playing dirty.
Very dirty.
Very dirty.
Hide the ball.
Yeah.
They know what's going on.
And
yet we have to call him as a witness because we want to find out why the diary got destroyed.
Yeah.
Which
and
said
you
so many good things about me.
You knew about this diary.
I knew about the diary.
Well, and I was going to say that Ted, over the course of this year, again, this is very consistent with innocence. He believes he's hired a legal team that's going to take care of this. And that as an innocent person, as soon as the facts are laid out, that the jury and the justice system will do the right thing. And so there is a lot of shock involved through the trial for you, right?
A lot of shock. Well, the judge, what was not allowed on the record, the way the jury was picked, the fact that some of the jury members were related to the police department or sheriff's department, since we didn't have the facts knowing of the Detective McKinley's involvement in the case, we couldn't ask the right questions. So we were prevented from having a defense by the prosecution. And I knew what was in the diary because I read it. And it talked about how she hated her mother and how she loved me. And wanted to spend more time with me. She was upset with me because I wouldn't take her down to the lake place, father-daughter.
Right. And
that's not consistent with someone that's being abused. They do not want to go with their father who is supposedly abusing them. So I really thought that was, if we called him as a witness, I couldn't impeach my own witness. I couldn't go after him.
Yeah.
And so that's what we had to do to find out what happened to the diary. And they played their cards. Later, I thought it was funny that he came up with his what happened at the deposition that he had with Matt O'Connor, that there was actually signals between him and the prosecutor on how to answer questions.
Well, here's in Missouri, which is different than a lot of states, we have open discovery, which puts more pressure on the prosecutors to provide us exculpatory information, and we can take depositions. And in the ability to take depositions gives us a better opportunity to find the truth, unless you're sitting across the table from a skilled liar. And when Matt asked two questions that ended up being so critical in this case, which I had never seen the first one ever asked before, which was, do you have a personal interest, Detective McKinley, in this case? And McKinley had to think about that. Well, what do you mean by a personal interest?
Sounds like Bill Clinton.
Yes, exactly. And then denied it. But the second question, which was, I thought, more critical, he asked him, he said, other than the police report we have, of your discussion with Mrs. White, did you have any other contact with Mrs. White other than what's in this report?
Yeah.
And his answer was no. And there is no way that you can misinterpret that lie.
Yeah.
But that lie prevented the defense from being able to properly cross-examine Tina, who was a major, well, she was the witness. She
Yeah.
got the conviction, not the little girl. Tina got that conviction.
So
And I call it perjury where I come from.
Yeah.
When you lie under oath.
I call it lies, which is a word not a lot of people use, but it's lies.
Well,
And
and it
here's
was
the conflict they had, okay? You've got two people from the state, the prosecutor and the lead investigator on the case, saying there were signals on how to
Right.
answer those questions, and you're supposed to give me a signal, Mrs. Prosecutor, if they get close to this affair thing,
Yeah.
clear your throat, tap your pencil.
and she didn't do
And
it.
she didn't do it.
So he was free to lie.
And so she says it didn't happen.
Yeah.
He says it did happen.
Oh, she said it happened. Oh, did you say he didn't say it happened?
No, on the signal part, she
admitted it happened.
No, she denied. Jenny Metler denied it, I believe, didn't she? Okay.
No, she admitted it, which made it even worse for her.
The nightmare of nightmares happens.
Yeah.
You get convicted.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I remember the last thing that was supposedly ordered was the pre-sentence investigation. My family was hysterical, and Tina was laughing.
How about you? How were you?
I was despondent. I think my whole, I was sweating. I was, couldn't think. I couldn't feel. I don't know if you could ever describe something like that. I actually felt like I had an out-of-body experience, and it was just nothing but numbness. That from my head to my toe, my whole body went numb.
You're still out on bail, correct?
I was put into jail. I was jumped by those inmates that I told you about, and I was released to go get my affairs in order until the sentencing.
And you went quite a ways to get your affairs in order, didn't you?
Yeah,
You went to Costa Rica, didn't you? Did you have affairs down there?
I went home and sat on my bed for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Were my mom and dad's house, and all that came in my head was, I need more time. I don't have the pieces of the puzzle. I need more time, and I made a conscious decision to go to Costa Rica.
Good. Got on a plane, went there.
I got on a plane and went down there. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as a result of going down there, you're classified as
I'm a fugitive.
a fugitive, and you're now kind of an infamous fugitive because you're featured on one of America's most favorite
Wanted.
TV.
America's
Most Wanted. John Walsh is on there, correct?
I'm 2 below Osama bin Laden.
Okay. Child molester.
Fugitive.
Fugitive. Were you caught? Did you come back? What?
I was a tourist for about 6 months, and then I went to work at selling real estate
Yeah.
at one of the resorts down there. And one of my clients had gone up into an Americana hotel in San Jose and saw the America's Most Wanted blip
Yeah.
on there and turned me in. And so they came in and surrounded me with 6 machine guns in the lobby
Wow.
and took me to the Costa Rican prison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you came back to Missouri.
Well, it was a little bit more than that. I was in there for 5.5 months
In Costa Rica?
in Costa Rica prison. I had
What's their
found-
prisons like?
Well, there was 5,000 third world prisonees, I guess you'd call them, and all of the drug cartels were in there, the Contras. You know, I landed on that airport that Ollie North said he never built.
Yeah.
That we put all the military equipment in. I
You
landed.
mean the Betsy North Airport?
Yeah, the Daniel Obrador International Airport in Guanacaste is a big jumbo jet airline, and so anyway, I was in with all those Contras, and a lot of the, you know, it was the inmates ran the jail. The drugs were prevalent, were brought in by the guards.
What was it like? I mean, you're kind of an unusual guy there. A typical middle-class white guy with Contras, guerrillas.
Yeah. Well, it was their prison, it was their rules, and you had to follow them or you die. And there was 19 white guys in there, and I was the only one that walked out alive in 5.5 months.
What happened to the other ones?
They were killed
And why were they killed?
for various reasons. Debt. They wanted to steal their jewelry.
How did you
They
survive
butt in
this?
line. Well, it was a unique deal. I had $400 in my shoe, and when I came into the deal, I loaned the number 2 guy the money because he had a debt to the number 1 guy, and turned out that he had been set up. Found out about it, took my money, paid off his debt, and then he killed the number 1 guy, and he ended up running the prison.
So he was the number 1 guy.
He said, anybody touches this guy, I'll kill you and your family. So that's how I made it.
Wow. And so now you're taken back to Missouri.
Well, there was one more story I wanted to share with you.
Went to another country?
No.
Thankfully.
When I found out about what had happened, my parents had sent an attorney in with the cell phone. Mm-hmm. And during that time, my dad told me for the first time what had happened. And the hard part about this is you have to turn your life over to your dad to make a decision to come back and fight these, because the jury was recommending 250 years for something I didn't do. And so I remember having this conversation and finding out for the first time what had happened between Detective McKinley and my wife. And I said, Dad, he said, son, I'll sell everything I have, but you got to come back and fight this. And I said, ironically, I'll come back only on one condition, that you don't hire a public defender. And he said, I won't. And ironically, that's the person that ended up getting everything on the record at sentencing was Randy Slagle, public defender. So that was a critical moment in my life where I absolutely turned over my life to my father making this decision that we needed to fight this thing.
Yeah. Now your dad, in paying the legal fees in this whole thing, had to mortgage his house, I understand, twice.
Twice.
And he had a heart attack too, didn't he?
Yeah, 5 bypasses. Yeah, he's a practicing.
Nobody realizes,
optometrist.
how many other people are hurt
Right.
because of these prosecutors that are unethical, and nothing's happened to them, have they?
No, and that was a tough moment because I could have fought extradition and was fighting extradition, and then I realized that I needed to waive extradition. And so I waived extradition, and the U.S. Marshals came down. They took me to a bunker at Costa Rica. The judge came to the bunker, signed me over to them, and the head of the U.S. Marshals flew down with the Kansas City Marshals, and I couldn't figure out why he was there till we got off the plane in Kansas City and realized that he wanted to be the one presenting me to America's Most Wanted cameras.
Yeah.
And that's when they asked me 2 questions. They said, Mr. Ted, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah.
This is America's Most Wanted. And I said, yes, I do. I got 2 things. One, I'm totally innocent of all charges.
Yeah.
And the second is, why don't you go talk to the detective that's been screwing my wife the last 2 years, if you got any more questions.
Yeah.
And the important thing here in terms of his coming back, when a person leaves the jurisdiction after they've been sent or after they have been convicted, in most cases, they are waiving their appeal. And it's called the escape rule. And so Ted was facing the possibility that because he made the choice to go to Costa Rica, that all of his appeals would fail. Mm-hmm. And what's important to know is that the Court of Appeals found the violations of Ted's rights to be so bad, to be so egregious, that they said the escape rule will not apply here.
That's amazing. And along that same lines, a lot of people think that if you run, you're guilty.
Automatically.
Right? But I think it's important to bring up that some people run because of the pressure, because they have the fear and they know they're innocent and they can't win in the system that's supposed to protect them, correct?
And I think did the decision actually say that Ted was not running from justice, he was running to find justice?
Same as a fugitive, Harrison Ford.
And that's really important because he had to go in that movie, which was really similar, to find the prosthetic arm of the person who killed his wife. I had to go find the piece of the puzzle I didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. And they had the pieces and didn't give it to us in discovery.
And and you didn't know that. You didn't know where it was.
Now you were eventually, what were you sentenced to in the first trial?
Well, it was really a funny day. I walked into the courtroom and my public defender was there, and the prosecutor comes flying in and tells the judge, go ahead and throw the book at him. He can't get around the escape rule. And my attorney said, I've got a few pieces of evidence I'd like to get on the record.
Yeah.
The judge says, put them on there. So he puts about 60 pieces of evidence on there, and when the judge sees it,
All these inconsistencies, right?
the judge looks at the prosecutor and says, you better hope none of this is true. 50.
50 years.
And my attorney looked at me and said, Ted, we had a very good day.
50
And I
years.
said, 50 years is a good day.
I wish everybody would have a day like that. Huh?
And he proved to be true, because the things he did to put on the record, Randy Schlegel, a public defender, was what
Yeah.
laid the foundation for the appeal.
Yeah.
The second trial starts. All of these inconsistencies are brought up. That's when you come into the picture.
That's right.
And it ends in a mistrial. 11 jurors within, what, an hour?
Yeah.
Decided there wasn't any evidence to convict you, and one is a holdout mistrial. You have to go back to prison. What are your feelings?
Well, you could not sit there in that trial and know that something was wrong, because from the time they put their first witness on, which was the prosecutor, they were impeached, their testimony, they became our witnesses, they did not win. And so something was wrong, and I knew something was wrong, and it was absolutely incredulous that you could sit there for 21 days and listen to this testimony with no evidence and have a juror hang me.
Mm-hmm.
And then
So
stuff.
how did you feel at that moment when that happened?
Yeah, because you have to go back to the walls.
No, I went back to county. I was in Walls for 2.5 years, waiting for trial, or waiting for my appeal.
Right.
My appeal was overturned, and the Walls was the oldest prison west of the Mississippi
Right.
at that time. And I can tell you more when you're ready. But what happened was I waited in Clay County for 2.5 years after the appeal.
Yeah.
I'm still in jail, and I got to go back. And that was the absolute lowest point of my entire life.
Did you feel like really despondent, like there was no hope?
It was all gone.
And you also felt a lot of anger towards your ex-wife?
Not at that moment. I was living life. It goes day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, and I was down to second by second.
What were you doing to occupy your time during the day? I mean, in prison, what were you doing? Do you have a
During
job?
that time,
Yeah, you have a job?
I was in a routine every day in the county. At that time, I was the longest held inmate ever in Clay County. And I got into a routine that I just did the same routine every day. I worked out for an hour. I read for certain hours. I got up and took a shower at the same time. I did my laundry.
Then you have to understand, in a jail where he was, many people say it's worse to be in that kind of facility than in a prison, because they never see the outdoors.
Yeah.
They are stuck in what is literally a large pen for humans. If you were to walk by down the hallway and you look in, it's like a zoo in a way.
They scream and holler, and
There's no jobs.
there's no jobs.
There's very little recreation. You have guys, young guys coming in and out who
Screaming,
are
fighting, hollering.
Troublemakers.
troublemakers.
Yeah, I had a lot of
gangbangers.
fights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a lot of fights.
Over important things like the television.
Yeah, and you can't hear you're talking to your family on the phone, and you can't hear them. You can't. I don't think I ever watched a TV show in 2.5 years where I saw that from front to beginning.
Right. There was a woman that you met in prison that used to come and basically help a lot of the prisoners, Mother Opal Williamson. How did she change your life?
Well, first time I met her, I saw her walking down the pathway to the chapel when I was coming out to go to lunch, and I said, "Who's that lady?" She was shining, and she was white. I mean, it was just, she was glowing, and the gentleman with me said, "That's Mother Opal, and she teaches Bible study here." And I said, "I got to meet her." And so I went over to meet her, and she took me by the hand, and she said, "Ted, what's your name?" I said, "My name's Ted." And she said, "Will you join my Bible study?" And she was 82 at the time. She'd been coming in for 40 years every day to open that chapel, to make them open the chapel. And there were 4 of us in her Bible study, and we prayed for the inmates, and she taught me she taught me the Bible basically, and I would go to her class every day, and then I had a lot of questions as I started to investigate, and she said to me one day, she said, I'm 80 some years old, I'm going to fake like I'm in a wheelchair. I need a wheelchair, and I'm going to request you to come to the front gate to get me, and that way we'll have 15 extra minutes for you to ask your questions. So they started calling me out to go get her in this wheelchair, and then I'd get to wheel her in and wheel her out. Yeah. And then she changed my life because she taught me, one day the other inmates didn't show up, and she said, tell me your story. And that's when all the anger came out. And I rant and I raved about what these people did to me, and they took my kids, and they all need to go to hell, and I hate them. I want to kill them. If I ever have anything to do, and so she looks at me, and she smiled and she said, I know what you need to do. And I said, what? Like she's got the answer. And she told me, took my hand, and she said, you need to get on your knees and pray for these people. And I jerked my hand off, and I said, you're the craziest old lady I've ever met in my life. If you think I'm going to get on my knees and pray for those people, you're crazy. Yeah. But I got so mad I didn't want to go back anymore. And I thought about what she'd said. And the problem is I wasn't in control of my life. The hate and the anger took over, consumed me. Mm. And when I got on my knees and prayed for these people, the people that did this to me and my family, that's when my life changed. I felt this burden lift from me, we call it a feed sack on the farm, and you have 100-pound feed sack that you carry to feed the cattle, and it just lifted off of my shoulders. And I said, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'm gonna forgive them, and I prayed for them. And from that moment on, the evidence in my case fell like manna from heaven. That's when the letters were found from Jamie had a girlfriend that they wrote personal letters. Yeah. And Sean O'Brien's, who worked with Cindy, daughter, found the letters about they were living together before the first trial.
Yeah.
Now, you get into the third trial. Yeah. You're finally acquitted. Record time, hour and a half. What are your thoughts?
I'm really happy for my family. Yeah, I was really happy.
You thought this day would never come?
Never come. Yeah, I remember sitting there when they read the first not guilty.
In the courtroom, did you just throw your arms up?
I think I just sat there. I think we hugged.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, you can't believe that you're hearing this. And finally, they got it. Finally, they got it right. And, and then that's when I would... actually, I had to go back to jail to probably be processed. So
they actually have to cuff him, take him back to jail, even though he's in prison. That's right.
Yeah.
We are fortunate right now to have with us the jury foreman in that third trial, Dan Miller. We're going to bring him on right now. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I understand you were the jury foreman in the third trial of Ted.
I was. And
did you have any knowledge of the case at all from reading in the newspapers or anything?
No, sir, none at all. I was living out of state at the time that it was all going on.
You were called as a juror.
I was called as a juror.
This is the very first jury trial you ever sat on.
Yes, sir.
And behind the closed doors, how did they pick you as the jury foreman?
I was probably a little more vocal and a little more of an advocate for Ted, and knowing the evidence and understanding it as it was presented.
In other words, in this third trial, you saw all the inconsistencies, the irregularities that had taken place in the other two trials.
Yes, sir.
And why is it that you could put yourself in his place? Because he had been in, how long had he been in prison at this time?
A little over 6 years.
Well, that's 6 years. How could you put yourself in his position, understanding that he had been in prison for 6 years, he was wrongfully accused, based on the evidence? How did you relate to that?
It was, as I say this, it was touching all the way around.
Yeah.
Starting from the very beginning. You could tell that Ted was broken. He'd been through a lot.
Yeah.
The evidence that was portrayed and given was so overwhelming was so overwhelming
In his favor.
in his favor
Yeah.
that as we talked, and we never really talked evidence, but none of us could really believe that we're honestly sitting here for a third time.
Yeah. Was that the general feeling of all the jurors in the jury room?
All but a couple.
You know, because in the second trial, there was 11 people who kind of felt the same way, but there was one holdout. These holdouts, let's say, that you had on your jury, what were their doubts? Did they bring to the jury room some prejudices or some feelings that everybody who's accused by the police got to be guilty?
Right. They did. And they should have never, after talking with them and questioning them on why they felt the way they did, they should have never been allowed to be on the jury.
How do you persuade somebody who seems adamant about the way they think? You know, if a person's accused by the police, they got to be guilty. How do you persuade them to see another viewpoint? We
went back over the timeline. We went back over the evidence that was presented. We all had our notes. We sat down and I had to do quite a bit of persuasion with a couple of people. There were some other advocates on my side as well there that helped out a lot. But it was taking the evidence, throw away your personal views and your personal thoughts, and let's get down to the real reason that we're here. And that's what really had to happen.
And your jury was only out for an hour and a half, right?
Right.
So you must be a fast talker.
There were times during the trial, and I'll be honest with you, most of us wanted to just stand up and say, okay, we've heard enough. In all honesty.
Seriously.
Right.
After the trial, I understand that you got to know Ted. You're working with him now, right?
Right.
Your whole life has kind of changed, doesn't it?
Meeting Ted White has been an interesting road.
And by the way,
it's been very good.
And by the way, while you're a juror, you got paid what, $7 a day or something?
Yes, sir, $7.
As a result of being paid $7 a day, and the trial was what, 3 weeks, 2 weeks? How long was it?
It was close to 6.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
As a result of that, you suffered financial hardship, didn't you?
I did.
In fact, you had to go, you had to file bankruptcy because did you lose your job or something or what?
I was unfortunate enough to work for a company that didn't compensate you while you were doing any kind of community work like this.
Yeah.
So I lost my standard daily wages that I was used to getting for this 6-week period. I worked in an industry that was up and down anyway in the manufacturing world, and we ended up losing a vehicle, got driven to the point of bankruptcy, and it was a bad deal, but it is what it is.
But you saw that you were doing justice for somebody.
Right.
You were doing justice, which should have been done in the first trial, right?
Right.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with some of the things that, that you stood for and for him. Because without you, he might not be here today.
They're the real heroes.
Yeah.
People like Mother Opal and Dan, and they stood up to the system. I appreciate that.
Well, you're very welcome. And part of the conversation we used to have is sitting up in the jury room was, even if you have one small doubt, I would rather meet my maker knowing that I let a guilty man free than sentence an innocent man for the rest of his life.
Well, thank God you think that way. Thank God you were in the right place at the right time. And thank you for being on this show.
Thank you very much.
Cindy, what a remarkable story. I mean, we could listen to Ted for hours and hours and hours. I mean, it's just amazing the injustice that happened. You have represented a lot of people, and you too, Matt, that have had similar kind of experiences now that you've been practicing law for 20 years or so. What is your feeling about justice in America today?
I think that justice is something that is only found when certain things are in place. I have another picture on the wall of another man who was exonerated, and if we don't have law enforcement who is going to act fairly and ethically and unbiased towards each person, if we don't have prosecutors who really believe their oath that they're officers of the court, and that justice is as much about making sure that you don't incarcerate, charge innocent people. If the gatekeepers, who are the judges, won't listen to the defense lawyers who are themselves biased, if there's an unevenness between the sides, of a prosecutor who has all the information and all the talent and defense lawyers who have neither, then you can't get justice. But I will say that when all of the things are done correctly, I believe strongly in the jury system. I believe strongly in the ability of citizens to make good decisions when all of the players are playing the game the way they're supposed to.
We talk about prosecutors and judges and even criminal defense attorneys that become jaded over the years because, you know, let's face it, many people are guilty.
Right.
You know, you've handled a lot of cases of people who became exonerated, got exonerated.
Or acquitted.
Or acquitted. What is your criteria when somebody comes to you and says, I didn't do it? What criteria do you look at before you take on a case? Because these are big undertakings, aren't they?
They are.
This devotes a lot of time, a lot of money, right? A lot of these people, they don't have money to pay lawyers, do they?
Well, nobody who gets a serious charge has enough money.
So what kind of criteria do you use to decide what cases to take on?
Well, I am what would it be called? I am someone who takes, I represent indigent people. So I take on whoever calls me, whoever needs help. And when I walk into a room to talk to a person accused of a crime, I come in without judgment. I come in to actually listen to who they are and what their story is. Mm-hmm. And I am not the fact finder in the sense that I'm going to condemn them or judge them. I'm going to find out what the truth is. And my objective, even as a criminal defense lawyer, is to somehow bring the truth into the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of criminal defense lawyers would tell you that that's not how we're trained.
What about cases where you eventually find out that the person actually did the crime, but there should have been extenuating circumstances, mitigating circumstances which should have been introduced so that they weren't convicted of first-degree murder, for example?
And I would say that's about 100% of the cases.
Yeah. 100% of the cases. The other side doesn't want to hear anything.
Well, and their cases are overcharged. I hate to make this analogy, but the prosecutors are like good car salesmen. Yeah. And they inflate the price, whether they're asking for the death penalty or something else, because it pressures or corners that person into making decisions that are not the right decisions or not the just decisions, but the risks are so high.
Yeah. In this case with Ted, he was a friend of yours, and you were both his lawyers. When he finally was acquitted, what were your feelings? Come on, let's hear it.
Well, relief. Because when you're part of a miscarriage like that, it's painful to see it go on and on. Mm-hmm. So seeing him walk out of the Jackson County Detention Center that night, which took forever, as it always does when they process people, that 2 hours waiting for him to be processed out seemed like eons after all of the delay. And then, you know, you have to watch that you don't let the anger and the parts of this case that were horrific make you jaded, and so that you're not objective.
Is there a, like with the prosecutor, the assistant prosecutor, Jennifer, what was her name again? Mettler. Is there forever a distance with you and her, knowing that she caused an innocent man to go to jail for 6 years, put his family through hell and back? Father had a heart attack and everything. Isn't there kind of a sort of a animosity somewhat?
Well, I think interestingly, Matt said that his policy, even after a battle that wasn't properly fought, was to reach out to the other side and acknowledge that we are human, this is part of the work that we do, and we're going to see each other again. And as Ted said, when Mother Opal said, you need to drop to your knees and pray for those who have hurt you, my attitude about Jennifer Mettler was, in order to really represent Ted, I had to be able to sit in her chair and understand the world the way she saw it.
Yeah.
And so I would say that I have met Jennifer on a number of occasions, and my guess is that the animosity is more that she feels against me for what I have done to her career.
I saw her last week.
She did it to her own career.
I know, but I don't know that she would maybe exactly see it that
No, I
way.
don't think
Really? And she's still in the prosecutor's office.
No,
she's not.
She's left the practice and is a
Well,
mom.
hopefully left the practice of law. Is that right?
Well, she's a mom.
Yeah.
She went home to stay with the kids. And at the bottom line, Jennifer is her motivations were right. She wanted to protect children.
Yeah.
She just was too zealous.
Yeah.
She made decisions that she believed were in the best interest of children.
Yeah.
But she was unable.
Not in the best interest of the accused.
She was unable to sit in that chair. She couldn't see the world from there.
I think really, but she's systemic, and it was interesting. Sometimes life leaves clues, and I didn't put the timing together. But I saw her last week at the swearing in for the new U.S. attorney, and a lot of the people who were involved in this case peripherally have risen up, and I saw Jenny Mettler from across the room, and I don't feel anger or hostility toward her. That's just not part of my nature. I think that's part of what's wrong with our system is this concept of vengeance. I feel sorrow for her, and primarily because she was a new attorney, and the training that she received, and the supervision that she received, and the misguided notions that caused her to either allow or go along with this. That's not an excuse for her.
Yeah.
It's her license. It's her oath.
Right.
But I do feel pity for her, and even now, if she hasn't been able to come to terms with her part in this miscarriage, but we all get that way sometimes, and we have to be careful of that. And I think that's when you asked about justice, and Cindy's probably the only other lawyer besides myself, because I'm not a good liar. I know we hear a lot about lawyers. If there's a case where I can't be myself or tell the truth, I'm not any good. You get somebody else. And cases should be about finding the truth. And the public has a misperception. And there are some lawyers who don't view it that way. I do, because it works for me.
Well, thank God.
And it works for the client.
Yeah, and because
And it works for the system.
Yeah, jurors can smell that, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it stops a lot of times it doesn't. It's not what it's about.
Right.
They say, well, that's too vague and amorphous, and it's about pursuing the truth, whether you like it or not. Now, yes, there are certain duties I have to my client, and if they are guilty, maybe there are mitigating factors, and if they're innocent, you have a duty to keep turning over every stone until you're able to prove that. But justice is not just about like the Ted White case and the injustice in the system. The injustice that we have in this country and around the world is really the prejudices that we have, the inability to listen and care about where somebody else is coming from, and to be objective and empathize.
Okay.
Because really, in this case, what it was a prejudging, and that happens every day. Whether it's the accusation against him makes people stop thinking, and really, what this case I think signifies is that our voice as a people is not strong enough yet, because there should have been several places where people's individual ethics and morals should have risen up and said, I am not going to be part of this, and I'm going to stop it. And look how long it took.
Yes.
Look how many people knew and just went along with it. It was, and you talk about horrific things like the Holocaust. Well, how could that happen? Because people went along with it. They decided not to use their discretion, and that worries me.
Or their voice.
Yeah, in this country that we have a lack of that we're afraid to stand up sometimes. I mean, it should have been somebody in the Lee Summit Police Department, someone in the prosecutor's office, somebody somewhere should have done it. And it happens today, and people are afraid to make waves, and you've got to. And you know what? There's no job worth having. If you can't get fired from the job, you shouldn't have it.
Yeah.
If it requires you not to do the right thing.
Well, thank God Ted had you as lawyers, and thank God you care. And it's been an honor having you on the program. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about this show and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.